The rusty chains rattled as Jake Sullivan cut through the last padlock on Warehouse 47. His construction crew stood behind him in the Detroit Industrial District, thinking their boss had finally cracked under pressure. For 3 days, Jake had refused the demolition order, claiming he had a feeling about this place. What his team didn't know was that Jake wasn't just any construction worker. He was a former FBI auto theft investigator who'd walked away from a case that nearly got his family killed. As the massive doors creaked open, sunlight pierced the darkness, revealing gleaming chrome and pristine paint jobs. A 1967 Shelby GT500, a Lamborghini Miura, a Ferrari 250 GTO. Dozens of the world's most coveted cars sat in perfect rows, like sleeping giants in a mechanical graveyard. These weren't just any cars, they were ghosts from Jake's past, vehicles that had vanished from the FBI's most wanted list 15 years ago. But as Jake stepped inside, he noticed fresh tire tracks in the dust. Someone had been here recently, someone who knew he was coming. "Holy shit, boss!" Tommy Martinez, his youngest crew member, whistled low behind him. "Are these real?" Jake's weathered hands trembled as he approached the Shelby, its Cobra emblem glinting like a predator's eye. He knew this car. Hell, he'd memorized every curve, every modification. It had belonged to Richard Volkov, a Detroit mob lieutenant who'd claimed it was stolen from his private garage in 2009. Jake had suspected Volkov of insurance fraud, but before he could prove it, the car had vanished, along with 47 others from high-profile theft cases across the Midwest. "Nobody touches anything," Jake commanded, his voice carrying the authority he'd once wielded with a federal badge. "And nobody calls this in. Not yet." Big Mike Kowalski, his foreman for the past 8 years, stepped forward with suspicious eyes. "Jake, what the hell is going on? You've been acting strange since we got this demolition contract. And now," he gestured at the automotive fortune surrounding them, "now I'm thinking you knew something." Jake turned slowly, studying the faces of the 5 men who'd trusted him with their livelihoods. These weren't FBI agents trained to handle dangerous situations. They were working-class guys with families, mortgages, and no idea they'd just stumbled into something that could get them all killed. "I used to work for the government," Jake said carefully. "Before construction, I investigated car thefts." "You were a cop?" asked Danny Chen, their demolition specialist. "DI." Jake walked deeper into the warehouse, his boots echoing off concrete. "This collection, I've been hunting these cars for 15 years. The last time I got close, someone planted a bomb in my daughter's school locker." The warehouse fell silent except for the distant hum of Detroit traffic. Jake's flashlight beam danced across license plates, VIN numbers, and custom modifications that brought back memories he'd tried to bury. Each vehicle represented a victim, a family destroyed by theft, or worse, by the violence that followed when people got too close to the truth. "So what's the play here, boss?" Big Mike's voice was steady, but Jake caught the nervous edge. "We pretend we never saw this. Walk away and let whoever's running this operation know we were here." Jake knelt beside the fresh tire tracks, noting their width and tread pattern. A large vehicle, probably a truck or van. The tracks were maybe 12 hours old, based on how the dust had settled. Someone had moved at least one car recently, which meant the operation was still active. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Enjoying your reunion, Agent Sullivan?" Ice flooded Jake's veins. He'd been Jake the construction worker for 8 years. Only a handful of people knew his real history, and most of them were dead or in witness protection. "We need to leave. Now." Jake pocketed his phone and headed for the doors. "All of you, forget what you saw here. Go home to your families. Take a few days off." "Jake, wait." Tommy's voice cracked with excitement. "If these cars are worth what I think they're worth, we could all retire. My kid needs surgery, and your kid will need more than surgery if you stay involved in this." Jake spun around, his expression hard enough to cut glass. "The people who run this operation killed federal agents. They bombed a middle school. You think they'll hesitate to eliminate 5 construction workers?" As they filed out of the warehouse, Jake took one last look at the mechanical graveyard that had haunted his dreams for over a decade. Somewhere in Detroit, someone was watching, waiting to see what his next move would be. They'd made a mistake by letting him find this place, but Jake knew the real question wasn't why he'd been led here. The question was whether he'd live long enough to figure out who was pulling the strings. His phone buzzed again. The game begins tomorrow. Come alone, or your crew pays the price. The crowbar felt heavier than usual in Jake's calloused hands as he wedged it against the warehouse's rusted doorframe. Behind him, his three-man crew exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their growing concern for their boss's mental state. They'd been standing in front of this decrepit building for 20 minutes while Jake argued with himself about whether to proceed. "Boss, we're burning daylight here," Tommy Ricci called out, adjusting his hard hat. The youngest member of the crew, Tommy had worked with Jake for 3 years and had never seen him hesitate like this. The city wants this place flattened by Friday. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead despite the October chill. Something about this warehouse felt wrong. Had felt wrong since the moment he'd first laid eyes on it 2 weeks ago during the initial site survey. The building sat alone in a forgotten corner of the industrial district, surrounded by empty lots where other structures had already fallen to his wrecking ball. But this one was different. This one seemed to be waiting. "Jake, you okay?" Eddie Martinez stepped closer, his weathered face creased with concern. Eddie had been Jake's right-hand man for over a decade, through good times and bad, and he'd learned to read his boss's moods. "You've been acting strange about this job since day one." The third crew member, Frank Kowalski, leaned against their equipment truck and lit a cigarette. "Maybe the boss is finally cracking up. 20 years of knocking down buildings will do that to a man." His tone was joking, but his eyes held genuine worry. Jake ignored the comments and applied more pressure to the crowbar. The metal door groaned in protest, its hinges screaming against years of rust and neglect. He'd tried to convince himself that his reluctance was just nerves, maybe age catching up with him. But deep down, he knew it was something else entirely. The warehouse called to him in a way that made his skin crawl. With a final heave, the door gave way, swinging inward with a shriek that echoed through the empty lot. The crew fell silent as they peered into the darkness beyond. The smell hit them first, not the expected mustiness of abandonment, but something cleaner, more mechanical, motor oil and rubber, polish and leather. "What the hell?" Tommy whispered, pulling out his phone's flashlight. Jake stepped through the doorway first, his work boots echoing on concrete that was surprisingly clean. As his eyes adjusted to the dim interior, shapes began to emerge from the shadows. Long, sleek shapes covered by expensive-looking car covers, lots of them. "Boss!" Eddie's voice was barely audible as he followed Jake inside. "Tell me you're seeing this too." The warehouse was immaculate, climate-controlled, judging by the humming air circulation system overhead. Professional lighting fixtures hung from the ceiling, though they remained dark. Along the walls, specialized car lifts and maintenance equipment sat ready for use. This wasn't an abandoned building. This was an active facility disguised as a ruin. Frank had stopped smoking entirely, the cigarette hanging forgotten from his lips as he counted the covered vehicles. "There's got to be at least 15 cars in here, maybe 20. Jake moved toward the nearest covered vehicle, his heart hammering against his ribs. Every instinct told him to turn around, walk out, and call the city to report an error in their demolition order. Instead, he grabbed the edge of the car cover and pulled. The fabric fell away to reveal a pristine Lamborghini Aventador, its metallic blue paint job gleaming even in the filtered light from the doorway. The sticker on the windshield showed a price tag that made Jake's mouth go dry. "Jesus Christ!" Tommy breathed, moving to the next vehicle. He yanked off its cover to reveal a Ferrari 488 GTB in racing red. "This one's worth at least 300 grand. Eddie and Frank spread out through the warehouse, uncovering vehicle after vehicle. Porsches, Maseratis, Aston Martins, MC Larens, each one more expensive than the last. Some still had dealer plates, others bore license numbers from different states. different countries even. "This ain't right," Frank said, his voice carrying a tremor Jake had never heard before. "These cars, they're not supposed to be here." Jake pulled out his phone, his finger hovering over the number for the police. But something made him pause. In the far corner of the warehouse, partially hidden behind a stack of high-end tires, he spotted something that made his blood run cold. A workbench covered with what looked like vehicle identification plates and registration documents, tools for swapping VIN numbers, a laptop computer still glowing with activity. "We need to get out of here," he said quietly, "right now." But it was already too late. The sound of car engines filled the air outside, growing closer. Multiple vehicles moving fast. Jake's crew looked toward the door as shadows began to darken the entrance they'd just broken open. Someone had been watching, someone had been waiting, and now someone was coming to protect their $50 million secret. The fluorescent lights in the police station buzzed overhead like angry wasps as Jake sat across from Detective Carmen Rodriguez. She had the kind of eyes that missed nothing, dark, sharp, and currently focused on him with uncomfortable intensity. "So let me get this straight," Rodriguez said, tapping her pen against a yellow legal pad. "You just happened to find $50 million worth of stolen vehicles because you had a feeling about the warehouse?" Jake shifted in the hard plastic chair. "I know how it sounds. It sounds like someone who knew exactly what was in that building." Her voice carried the weight of 20 years on the force. The Lamborghini alone was taken from a Beverly Hills mansion 6 months ago, owners still offering a $100,000 reward. Through the interrogation room's one-way mirror, Jake could see his reflection, tired, stubble-faced, looking guilty as hell even though he wasn't. At least, not of this. "Detective, I've been doing demolition for 15 years. Sometimes you develop instincts about buildings. That warehouse felt wrong from the moment I walked in." Rodriguez leaned back, studying him. "Wrong how?" Jake rubbed his temples, trying to find words that wouldn't make him sound insane. The structure was too solid. Someone had reinforced it recently. New steel supports, updated electrical. Who spends that kind of money on a building scheduled for demolition? "Someone who needed a place to hide things," Rodriguez agreed. "The question is whether that someone was you." Before Jake could respond, the door opened and a man in an expensive suit entered. He moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. Rodriguez's expression darkened. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm Marcus Webb, attorney for Meridian Development." The man's handshake was firm but brief. "I understand there's been some confusion about the warehouse project." "Confusion?" Rodriguez's pen stopped tapping. "We found a chop shop operation worth more than most people's houses." Webb smiled, the kind of smile that cost $1,000 an hour, which my client discovered and reported immediately. "Mr. Sullivan has been nothing but cooperative." Jake stared at the lawyer. He'd never seen this man before in his life, but Webb was talking like they'd known each other for years. Something cold settled in his stomach. "I didn't call a lawyer," Jake said carefully. "Meridian Development looks after its contractors," Webb replied smoothly. "We have a significant investment in this project." Rodriguez's eyes narrowed. "How did you know Mr. Sullivan was here?" "Word travels fast in our business, Detective. We want to ensure this matter is resolved quickly and properly." Webb placed a leather portfolio on the table. "I have documentation showing the warehouse was scheduled for demolition specifically because of suspected criminal activity. My client was hired to eliminate the problem, which he did admirably." Jake felt like he was watching a play where everyone knew their lines except him. The paperwork Webb was showing Rodriguez looked official, complete with letterhead and signatures, but Jake had never seen any of it before. "This says Sullivan was specifically chosen for the job due to his discretion in handling sensitive situations," Rodriguez read aloud. She looked at Jake with new suspicion. "Care to explain that?" "I have no idea what that means." Jake's voice came out rougher than intended. "I've never done anything but straight demolition work." Webb's hand settled on Jake's shoulder with what felt like a warning. "Mr. Sullivan is being modest. He's handled several delicate projects for us involving properties with complicated histories. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. Jake realized he was being painted into a corner by people with more money and power than he'd ever have. But why? Detective, Webb continued, unless you have evidence of wrongdoing, I believe my client has been helpful enough for one day. Rodriguez gathered the papers, her jaw tight. Don't leave town, Sullivan. This investigation is far from over. Outside the station, Jake grabbed Webb's arm as the lawyer headed toward a black Mercedes. What the hell is going on? I never hired you. Webb turned, and for a moment his polished facade slipped. Underneath was something harder, colder. Mr. Sullivan, you've stumbled into something much bigger than a simple demolition job. The smart move is to take credit for being a good citizen and walk away. And if I don't want to walk away, then you might find yourself back in that room, but next time as a suspect rather than a witness. Webb straightened his tie. The warehouse was supposed to be empty. Someone made a serious mistake, and serious people don't like mistakes. The Mercedes pulled away, leaving Jake standing on the sidewalk as evening shadows stretched across the city. His phone buzzed with a text from Tommy. Cops released the warehouse. Boss wants us back to work tomorrow. Jake stared at the message, then at the police station behind him. 50 million in stolen cars didn't just appear overnight, and lawyers didn't show up out of nowhere unless someone was very worried about what else might be discovered. He was no longer just a demolition foreman. He was a loose end. The warehouse floor stretched before them like a cathedral of chrome and steel. Jake's flashlight beam swept across the collection, illuminating curves and edges that seemed to defy gravity. A blood-red Ferrari LaFerrari sat beside a gunmetal Bugatti Chiron, their surfaces so pristine they might have rolled off the showroom floor that morning. Jesus Christ, Tommy whispered, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Jake, do you know what we're looking at here? Jake did know. His father had taught him enough about cars to recognize the Holy Grail when he saw it. The Koenigsegg one in the far corner, was one of only 6 ever made. The McLaren P1 GTR beside it was track-only, worth more than most people's houses. But it was the car in the center that made his blood run cold. A pristine Shelby Cobra Daytona, the same model his father had worked on for Marcus Delacroix 25 years ago. We need to call the police, Maria said, but her voice lacked conviction. She was staring at an Aston Martin Valkyrie, its alien design making it look like it had materialized from the future. Hold on, Jake said, moving deeper into the collection. Something was nagging at him, a memory just out of reach. His father's stories about the old days, working for wealthy collectors who didn't ask too many questions about provenance. Rico was already pulling out his phone. I'm calling it in. This has got to be the biggest car theft ring in the city's history. Wait, Jake's voice cut through the space with unexpected authority. Give me a minute to think. He approached the Shelby, running his flashlight along its flawless curves. A small plaque was mounted on the wall behind it. 1965 Shelby Cobra Daytona Coupe, acquired 1998, restored by Patrick Sullivan. The air seemed to leave Jake's lungs, his father's name, etched in brass, staring back at him from the shadows. Patrick Sullivan, who had died in that car accident when Jake was 15. Patrick Sullivan, who had never mentioned working on a car like this. Jake? Tommy's voice seemed to come from very far away. You okay, man? Before Jake could answer, a sound echoed from outside, car doors slamming in rapid succession, multiple vehicles moving fast. Maria killed her flashlight instinctively, and the others followed suit, plunging them into darkness. How many people know about this place? Rico whispered. Jake's mind raced. The warehouse had been scheduled for demolition for months. The property records showed it had been abandoned since 2010, but clearly someone had been maintaining this collection, someone who wouldn't be happy about unexpected visitors. Footsteps echoed from the main entrance they'd forced open. Professional footsteps, measured and deliberate. Jake counted at least 4 sets, maybe more. Back exit? Maria mouthed in the darkness. Jake tried to remember the building's layout. Most warehouses this size had loading docks on multiple sides, but he couldn't be sure. The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied by the sweep of powerful flashlights. "This way," he whispered, leading them between the cars toward what he hoped was the rear of the building. The Lamborghini Veneno they passed was worth over $4 million. The thought struck him as absurd. Here they were, hiding between cars worth more than some small country's GDP, running from people who probably wouldn't hesitate to kill to protect this secret. A voice called out from the entrance, clear and commanding, "I know you're in there. Come out now, and maybe we can discuss this like civilized people." The accent was slight but unmistakable, Eastern European, maybe Russian. Jake had heard that accent before, in his father's stories about certain clients who paid in cash and asked no questions. They reached the far wall, and Jake's hand found a door handle. Locked. Rico pulled out a small tool from his belt, the same one he'd used on the main entrance. But Jake grabbed his wrist. "They'll hear it," he whispered. The flashlight beams were sweeping systematically through the collection now, moving closer. Jake could see the outline of at least 3 figures, moving with military precision. These weren't car thieves, they were professionals. Maria tugged on his sleeve and pointed upward. A service ladder led to what looked like a maintenance catwalk near the ceiling. It was their only option. One by one they climbed, the metal rungs cold under their hands. Jake went last, his mind still reeling from seeing his father's name on that plaque. What had Patrick Sullivan been involved in, and why was Jake only learning about it now, 25 years later, in a warehouse full of stolen supercars? From the catwalk, they could see the entire collection spread below them. The men searching were methodical, checking behind each car, under covers, leaving nothing to chance. They knew the warehouse intimately. One of them stopped directly below the Shelby Cobra and looked up, as if sensing something. In the reflected light from his flashlight, Jake caught a glimpse of his face, scarred, weathered, with eyes like black ice. The man smiled, and Jake knew they'd been found. The metallic screech of the warehouse door echoing in his ears, Jake stood frozen at the threshold while his crew pushed past him into the cavernous space. Their excited voices bounced off the concrete walls as they moved between the rows of gleaming vehicles. But all Jake could hear was the thundering of his own heartbeat. "Boss, you seeing this?" Tommy's voice cracked with excitement. "That's a McLaren P1. I've only seen one in magazines." Jake forced his legs to move, stepping deeper into what felt like a fever dream. The warehouse stretched back further than he'd expected, with cars arranged in precise rows under dust covers that had been hastily pulled away. Afternoon sunlight streamed through grimy windows, casting long shadows between million-dollar machines. "Nobody touch anything," Jake barked, his voice sharper than intended. His crew froze mid-step. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." But even as he said it, Jake's mind was racing through possibilities, none of them good. $50 million worth of exotic cars didn't just appear in abandoned warehouses. This was either the world's most elaborate prank, or they'd stumbled into something that could get them all killed. Rodriguez whistled low, crouching beside a midnight blue Bugatti Veyron. "VIN numbers are still intact on this one. Should we call the cops?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Jake pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over the screen. Protocol demanded he call the authorities immediately. His insurance required it. Hell, basic human decency required it. But something made him hesitate. "Give me a minute to think," he said, pocketing the phone. He walked slowly through the collection, noting details his crew had missed in their excitement. The cars weren't just expensive. They were specifically chosen. Every vehicle represented the pinnacle of automotive engineering from the past decade. Someone with serious knowledge and even more serious connections had assembled this collection. More troubling were the subtle signs of recent activity: fresh tire tracks in the dust, a coffee cup on a workbench that couldn't be more than a day old. Someone had been here recently and they might be coming back. "Tommy, get everyone outside." "Now." "But boss." "Now." Jake's tone brooked no argument. As his crew reluctantly filed toward the exit, he took one last look around. In the far corner, partially hidden behind a Ferrari 458, he spotted something that made his blood run cold. A security camera, its red recording light blinking steadily in the shadows. Outside, the crew huddled near their trucks, voices animated with speculation and barely contained greed. Jake could see it in their eyes, the same look he'd seen in boom times when bonuses were fat and everyone thought the money would never run out. It was the look that made good men make bad choices. "Listen up," Jake said, his voice cutting through their chatter. "We're going to call this in to the police, right now, and until they get here, nobody says a word about what we saw. Not to your wives, not to your drinking buddies, not to anybody." "Come on, Jake," Rodriguez said, stepping closer. "Think about what you're saying. We found this fair and square. Finders keepers, right? Those cars are stolen," Jake shot back. "Every last one of them. You want to explain to the FBI why you've got a $2 million Koenigsegg in your garage?" "We don't have to take them," Tommy said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But maybe we saw something, you know? Like suspicious activity. Maybe whoever owns these cars would pay good money to keep their business quiet." Jake stared at his crew, men he'd worked with for years, men he'd trusted with his life on dangerous job sites. Now they were talking about extortion like it was overtime pay. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that gets people disappeared," Jake said. "We're calling the cops. End of discussion." He pulled out his phone again, but before he could dial, the distant rumble of engines reached his ears. 3 black SUVs were approaching fast down the access road, kicking up clouds of dust in their wake. "Everybody stay calm," Jake said, though his own heart was hammering against his ribs. "Let me do the talking." The SUVs pulled up in a semicircle around Jake's crew, engines idling. Tinted windows made it impossible to see inside, but Jake counted at least 6 vehicles, professional, organized, dangerous. The driver's door of the lead SUV opened and a woman stepped out. Mid-40s, expensive suit, the kind of cold confidence that came from never being told no. She surveyed Jake's crew with the dispassionate gaze of someone evaluating livestock. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice carrying easily across the dusty lot. "I believe you've seen something that doesn't belong to you." Jake's mouth went dry. She knew his name, which meant they'd been watched, probably from the moment they'd arrived at the warehouse. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Jake said carefully. The woman smiled, but it never reached her eyes. "No misunderstanding at all. We need to talk." The black sedan had been parked across from the warehouse for 3 hours, its occupants watching through tinted windows as Jake's crew prepared for another day of investigation. Inside the car, 2 men in expensive suits spoke in hushed tones, their conversation punctuated by the occasional crackle of a radio. "He's becoming a problem," the passenger said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he observed Jake directing his team near the warehouse entrance. "We should have moved the cars weeks ago." The driver, a heavy-set man with graying temples, shook his head. "Too risky. The heat from the Monaco job is still too fresh. Moving 50 million in exotic cars requires planning, not panic. Then we eliminate the witnesses. All of them. A construction crew disappearing would draw more attention than we can afford." The driver's phone buzzed, and he answered it immediately. "Yes, sir, understood. We'll handle it." He ended the call and started the engine. "Change of plans. We're going to make Mr. Sullivan an offer he can't refuse." Meanwhile, inside the warehouse, Jake felt like he was walking through an automotive museum designed by a master thief. Each vehicle told a story of sophisticated crime: the Bugatti Veyron with Swiss plates, the Merci Laren P1 that matched the description from a London theft report he'd found online, the Koenigsegg that had vanished from a private collector in Dubai just 6 months ago. "Boss, you need to see this," Marcus called from the far corner of the warehouse, where he'd been examining what appeared to be a makeshift office space hidden behind a false wall. Jake made his way over, stepping carefully around the pristine vehicles. The hidden room contained filing cabinets, computer equipment, and walls covered with photographs, documents, and what looked like shipping manifests. It was clearly the nerve center of a sophisticated operation. "Look at this," Marcus said, holding up a manila folder thick with paperwork. "These are transport documents for every car in here. Fake bills of sale, forged registration papers, shipping routes through dummy companies. This isn't just stolen cars, Jake. This is a full-scale money laundering operation." Tony whistled low as he examined a computer that had been left running. "They've got buyer lists here. Names, locations, payment methods. Some of these addresses are in countries I can't even pronounce." Jake felt a chill run down his spine as he scanned the documents. The scope of the operation was staggering. The warehouse wasn't just a storage facility. It was a distribution hub for an international criminal network that moved stolen luxury vehicles like commodities. "We need to call this in," Jake said, reaching for his phone. But before he could dial, the sound of approaching vehicles echoed from outside. Multiple engines moving fast. "That's not good," Rico muttered, peering through a grimy window. 3 black SUVs just pulled up, and the guys getting out don't look like cops. Jake quickly pocketed several documents from the desk while his crew grabbed what evidence they could carry. Through the windows, they could see men in dark clothing positioning themselves around the building's exits. "Back door," Jake whispered urgently, but Tony shook his head. "Already checked. 2 guys posted there. They were trapped." The warehouse's main door creaked open slowly, and footsteps echoed across the concrete floor. A voice called out, calm and professional, "Mr. Sullivan, there's no need for dramatics. We simply want to talk." Jake recognized the voice from somewhere but couldn't place it. He motioned for his crew to spread out among the cars, using the expensive vehicles as cover. "We know you're in here," the voice continued, "and we know what you've found, but you're looking at this all wrong. This isn't a crime scene. It's a business opportunity." The man who emerged from behind a red Ferrari was impeccably dressed, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the warehouse's dusty environment. Jake recognized him immediately, Vincent Castellano, the city councilman who'd been pushing for the warehouse's demolition from the beginning. "Councilman Castellano," Jake said, stepping into view. "I should have known." Castellano smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're a smart man, Jake. Smart enough to understand that some discoveries are better left buried. My associates and I are prepared to make you a very generous offer for your discretion." "What kind of offer?" $5 million. Split among your crew however you see fit. All we ask is that you complete your demolition job as originally planned. Bury everything under concrete and steel and walk away wealthy men." Jake could hear his crew shifting nervously among the cars. $5 million was more money than any of them would see in a lifetime of construction work. "And if we refuse?" Jake asked. Castellano's smile faded. "Then you'll discover that construction sites can be very dangerous places. Accidents happen. Equipment fails. Sometimes entire crews don't make it home." The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and Jake realized they had stumbled into something far more dangerous than stolen cars. The warehouse felt different in the early morning light filtering through the grimy windows. Jake stood among the collection of supercars, their pristine surfaces reflecting the golden rays like mirrors. The Bugatti Chiron seemed to pulse with life even in stillness, its carbon fiber body a testament to engineering perfection that someone had stolen and hidden away. "We need to call this in," Tommy said for the 3rd time, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. He hadn't stopped pacing since they'd arrived an hour ago, his work boots creating a nervous rhythm against the floor. "And tell them what, exactly?" Jake replied, running his hand along the hood of a McLaren P1. "That we found 50 million in stolen cars that we can't prove are stolen? That we broke into a building we were supposed to demolish and discovered what looks like a professional chop shop operation?" Marcus emerged from behind a row of vehicles, his tablet in hand. "I've been running the VINs through every database I can access without triggering alerts. 3 of these cars were reported stolen in the past 18 months. The others, he shook his head. Either the thefts were never reported, or someone's done a very good job of scrubbing the records. The implications hung heavy in the air. Unreported thefts meant insurance fraud, or worse, owners who couldn't report the crimes because they had their own secrets to hide. "Boss," Danny called from the far corner where he'd been examining the warehouse's rear exit. "You need to see this." They gathered around as Danny pointed to fresh tire tracks in the dust near a loading dock that had been hidden from view when they'd first entered. The tracks were recent, so recent that Jake could smell lingering exhaust fumes. "Someone's been here," Danny continued. "Recently. Like, maybe last night." Jake felt ice form in his stomach. "How recently?" "These tracks are maybe 8 to 12 hours old, and look at this." Danny knelt beside a cigarette butt that still showed traces of ash. This was smoked here. Someone was watching, waiting. The sound of approaching vehicles outside made them all freeze. Through the dirty windows, Jake could see 2 black SUVs pulling into the lot, their windows tinted dark enough to hide the occupants. "Back exit," Jake whispered. But Marcus was already shaking his head. "There's another vehicle back there. We're boxed in." The SUVs stopped, engines still running, car doors slammed with military precision. Jake counted at least 6 sets of footsteps approaching the main entrance they'd left open. Behind the cars, Jake ordered, and his crew scattered like shadows among the automotive treasures. He crouched behind the Bugatti, his heart hammering against his ribs as voices carried through the warehouse. "Told you this place was compromised." The voice was cultured, educated, with a slight accent Jake couldn't place. "The demolition was scheduled for next week. We had time." This voice was rougher, local. Scheduled means nothing when the crew shows up early. "Do you have any idea what this collection represents? What certain people will do to keep it quiet?" Jake pressed himself lower as footsteps moved between the cars. Through the gap beneath the Bugatti's chassis, he could see expensive leather shoes and what looked like military-grade boots. "The cars can be moved," the rough voice said. "Give me 48 hours." 48 hours? The cultured voice carried deadly amusement. "The Sullivan crew was here yesterday. They've seen everything. What do you think happens when word gets out that Jake Sullivan found 50 million in stolen exotics?" The mention of his name sent electricity down Jake's spine. These people knew who he was, knew his crew had been here. "Sullivan's solid," the rough voice protested. "He won't talk." "Perhaps, but can you guarantee his crew's silence?" "That young one with the tablet, he's already been running searches. My contacts flagged the database queries an hour ago." Jake's blood turned to ice water. They were monitoring Marcus's searches. These people had resources, connections that reached into law enforcement databases. "What do you want me to do?" the rough voice asked. "Clean up the mess, all of it. The cars disappear, the warehouse comes down as scheduled, and anyone who might complicate our operation, well, let's just say demolition sites are notoriously dangerous places." The implication hit Jake like a physical blow. They weren't just talking about moving stolen cars, they were discussing murder. Footsteps moved closer to their hiding spot. Jake could see Tommy crouched behind a Ferrari 20 feet away, his face pale with terror. Marcus was pressed against the rear wheel of a Lamborghini, clutching his tablet like a lifeline. 48 hours, the cultured voice repeated. "Clean slate. No witnesses, no evidence, no problems. The buyers are expecting delivery next month, and nothing will prevent that transaction. Are we clear? Crystal clear." The footsteps retreated, but Jake remained frozen until the sound of engines faded completely. When silence finally returned to the warehouse, it felt different, heavy with threat and the weight of deadly secrets. They weren't just witnesses anymore, they were targets. The parking garage beneath the Meridian Hotel felt like a concrete tomb at 2 in the morning. Jake sat in his pickup truck, engine off, watching steam rise from the manholes in the distance. Every shadow could hide a threat, every sound could signal danger. He'd chosen this location carefully, multiple exit routes, good sight lines, and enough ambient noise from the nearby highway to mask conversation. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, level B2, southeast corner. Come alone. Jake checked his Glock one more time, chambered around, and slipped it back into his waistband. The warehouse discovery had turned his world upside down, and now he was meeting with someone who claimed to have answers about the stolen cars, someone who'd contacted him through channels that made his skin crawl. The elevator descended with mechanical precision, each floor marking his descent into uncertainty. B2 was dimly lit, filled with luxury sedans and SUVs belonging to hotel guests who probably had no idea their vehicles sat just stories below a meeting that could turn deadly. A figure emerged from behind a concrete pillar, medium height, wearing a long coat that concealed everything beneath. In the poor lighting, Jake couldn't make out facial features, but something about the person's posture suggested familiarity with dangerous situations. Mr. Sullivan. The voice was electronically distorted, making gender identification impossible. Thank you for coming. Who are you? Jake stayed near the elevator, finger resting on the call button. Someone who's been watching the warehouse for a very long time. Someone who knows exactly what you found and why people are willing to kill for it. Jake's pulse quickened. The cars belong to you? A low mechanical laugh echoed through the garage. Those vehicles represent something much larger than simple theft. They're evidence of an operation that reaches into the highest levels of law enforcement and government. The figure moved closer, and Jake caught a glimpse of expensive shoes beneath the coat. Designer, polished, not what he'd expected from a criminal contact. 3 years ago, the voice continued, a joint task force was formed to investigate high-end auto theft rings operating along the eastern seaboard. What the public didn't know was that certain members of that task force were actually facilitating the thefts, providing inside information about seizures, investigations, even witness identities. Jake felt his stomach drop. Cops were stealing cars? Worse, they were operating a sophisticated laundering scheme. Steal exotic cars, hide them until investigations cooled, then sell them to private collectors who didn't ask questions. The warehouse was their temporary storage facility. Why wasn't it cleaned out? Because the operation fell apart when one of the participants developed a conscience. Special Agent Rebecca Torres started asking inconvenient questions, digging where she shouldn't have dug. She discovered that her own partner was feeding information to the theft ring. The name hit Jake like a physical blow. Torres, the woman who'd been murdered outside his apartment, the woman whose death had been blamed on a random robbery. Torres wasn't killed by some street criminal, Jake said, the pieces clicking into place. She was eliminated because she was about to expose everything. The cars in that warehouse are evidence of federal crimes, conspiracy, murder. They represent the potential downfall of at least 6 law enforcement officials and 3 federal prosecutors. Jake's mind raced. Why are you telling me this? Because they're planning to eliminate the evidence and anyone who's seen it. Your crew is already being watched. Marcus Williams received a very interesting job offer yesterday, one that would take him far from the city. Coincidence? Fear shot through Jake's chest. He dragged his friends into something that could get them killed. What do they want? The warehouse demolished as planned, the cars crushed with the building, all evidence buried under tons of concrete and steel. A tragic accident during demolition, maybe a gas leak explosion that kills anyone who might have seen too much. You're saying they want to murder my entire crew? I'm saying they've done it before. The original warehouse owner didn't die of a heart attack. The security guard who worked that district didn't commit suicide. Rebecca Torres wasn't killed in a robbery. Jake felt sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cold air. What do you want from me? Help. The cars themselves aren't enough evidence. We need the documentation that proves the conspiracy, shipping manifests, payment records, correspondence between the participants. That information is hidden somewhere in the warehouse. We searched every inch of that place. You searched for cars. You weren't looking for hidden compartments, false walls, concealed safes. These people are professionals. They know how to hide evidence. The figure reached into the coat, and Jake tensed, hand moving toward his gun. Instead of a weapon, a small device emerged, a GPS tracker and what looked like a high-end camera. You're going back to that warehouse. Document everything. Find the hidden records. And trust no one in law enforcement until we can determine who's compromised. Jake stared at the equipment. Why should I trust you? Because, Mr. Sullivan, I'm the only person who can keep you and your crew alive long enough to expose the truth. The headlights cut through the darkness as Jake pulled into the warehouse district, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Every shadow seemed to move. Every distant sound made him glance in the rearview mirror. The weight of Detective Morrison's words pressed against his chest like a physical force. 3 bodies, all connected to the warehouse, all dead within the last 6 months. He parked 2 blocks away from the warehouse, deciding to approach on foot. The industrial area was tomb quiet at 11 p.m., with only the distant hum of highway traffic breaking the silence. Jake pulled his jacket closer and started walking, his footsteps echoing off the empty buildings. The warehouse loomed ahead, its broken windows like dead eyes staring into the night. Jake had left the main doors unlocked earlier, a calculated risk that now seemed foolish. As he approached, he noticed something that made his blood run cold, a thin sliver of light bleeding from beneath the heavy metal doors. Someone was inside. Jake pressed himself against the building's brick wall, his heart hammering. He should call the police, should turn around and drive straight to the nearest station. Instead, he found himself creeping along the wall toward a side window, the same one Tommy had used to first spot the cars. The glass was grimy and cracked, but Jake could make out movement inside. Flashlight beams danced across the warehouse floor, and he counted at least 3 distinct lights. Voices carried through the night air, too muffled to make out words but urgent in tone. Jake pulled out his phone, finger hovering over Morrison's contact. Before he could dial, a hand clamped down on his shoulder with crushing force. "Don't move, don't make a sound," a voice whispered in his ear. The barrel of something hard pressed against his ribs. "Turn around slowly." Jake complied, finding himself face to face with a man in his 50s, well-dressed despite the late hour. Even in the dim light, Jake could see the cold calculation in his eyes. This wasn't some street thug. This was someone accustomed to giving orders and having them followed without question. "Jake Sullivan," the man said, as if testing the name. "You've caused quite a bit of trouble." "I don't know what you're talking about," Jake managed, though his voice betrayed his fear. "Of course you don't." The man's smile held no warmth. "Walk to the door, slowly." They moved toward the warehouse entrance, Jake acutely aware of the weapon trained on him. The voices inside had stopped, and the flashlight beams had gone still. His captor reached past him to push open the door, and Jake found himself being shoved into the cavernous space. The scene inside made his stomach drop. The cars were still there, but now they were bathed in harsh portable lighting that had been set up around the perimeter. 3 men worked methodically around the vehicles, one of them connecting what looked like jumper cables to a Ferrari's battery. "Found our friend outside playing Peeping Tom," announced the man behind Jake. One of the workers looked up, a thin man with nervous eyes and oil-stained hands. "This is getting out of hand, Marcus. First the old man who used to sleep here, then that kid who was asking too many questions at the diner, now this. How many more bodies before—" "Before what?" Marcus interrupted sharply. "Before you remember how much you're being paid to keep your mouth shut." Jake's mind raced. The old man. That had to be homeless Harry. And the kid at the diner. Tommy had mentioned talking to people around the neighborhood about the warehouse's history. Someone had been listening, tracking anyone who showed too much interest. "You're moving the cars," Jake observed, trying to keep his voice steady. Marcus stepped into the light and Jake could see him more clearly now. Expensive suit, gold watch, manicured nails, definitely not someone who got his hands dirty personally. Very observant. Yes, our little storage arrangement has become compromised thanks to your interference. These vehicles will be relocated to a more secure facility. Stolen cars, Jake said. Borrowed vehicles, Marcus corrected with that cold smile. Taking a temporary vacation from their previous owners while we arrange for their career change. New paint, new papers, new lives in countries that don't ask uncomfortable questions. One of the workers had moved to Jake's left, close enough that he could smell motor oil and cigarettes. The third man continued working on the cars, but Jake noticed his hand kept drifting to something tucked in his waistband. The thing is, Mr. Sullivan, Marcus continued, you've seen too much, know too much. Your demolition schedule has been quite inconvenient for our operation. I never said anything to anyone, Jake lied. Perhaps. But you spoke with Detective Morrison this afternoon. We have people who keep us informed of such conversations. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the warehouse's temperature. If they had sources in the police department, then Morrison might be walking into a trap. Or worse, Morrison might already be compromised. The sound of engines starting echoed through the warehouse as two of the supercars roared to life. The rain hammered against the windshield as Jake pulled into the parking lot of the Riverside Motel, a decrepit establishment that had seen better decades. Detective Chen's cruiser was already there, tucked between two rusted pickup trucks. Jake checked his rearview mirror for the third time in 10 minutes. Every shadow seemed to hide potential threats now. Chen was waiting in room 237, her service weapon visible in its holster. She'd insisted on meeting here rather than the police station. Too many ears, she'd said cryptically over the phone. Jake knocked twice, paused, then knocked once more as instructed. Come in, Chen's voice called from inside. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial disinfectant. Chen sat at a small table with her laptop open, surrounded by scattered photographs and documents. Her usually pristine appearance showed signs of strain. Wrinkled shirt, dark circles under her eyes. You look like hell, Jake said, settling into the chair across from her. 3 cops are dead, Jake. Hell is exactly where I've been living. She slid a manila folder across the table. The ballistics came back. Same gun killed Martinez and both uniforms at the warehouse. Professional work, single shots, close range. Jake opened the folder, wincing at the crime scene photos. Any leads on the shooter? That's where things get interesting. Chen pulled up a surveillance photo on her laptop screen. The image showed a tall man in dark clothing, his face partially obscured by shadows. This was taken from a traffic camera 6 blocks from Martinez's apartment, 20 minutes before the estimated time of death. Jake studied the figure. Something about the man's posture, the way he carried himself, seemed familiar. You recognize him? Not exactly, but look at this. Chen opened another file revealing financial records. I've been digging into Volkov Construction's background. On paper they're legitimate, permits, contracts, the works. But their money trail leads to some very dark places. She highlighted several entries with her finger. Shell companies within shell companies, all eventually tracing back to an outfit called Meridian Holdings. Want to guess who sits on Meridian's board? Jake leaned forward. I'm afraid to ask. Richard Caldwell, your city councilman friend. The revelation hit Jake like a physical blow. That's impossible. Caldwell's been in politics for 20 years. He's clean. Is he? Chen pulled out another photograph. Caldwell shaking hands with a man Jake didn't recognize at what appeared to be an upscale restaurant. This was taken last month. The other man is Viktor Kozlov, known associate of the Bratva, Russian organized crime. Jake's mind raced, connecting dots he hadn't even seen before. The warehouse. Caldwell knew about the cars. More than knew about them. I think he was part of the operation from the beginning. Chen closed the laptop and fixed Jake with a serious stare. Which brings me to why we're meeting in this charming establishment instead of my office. I have reason to believe someone in my department is feeding information to Caldwell's people. Jesus, Chen, how deep does this go? Deep enough that I'm questioning everyone I work with. She gathered the photographs into a neat stack. "I've been tracking the stolen vehicles. The cars in that warehouse? They weren't just any stolen cars. Each one was taken during specific high-profile thefts over the past 3 years. Museum pieces, private collections, cars that made international news when they disappeared." Jake remembered the pristine condition of the vehicles, how they'd been arranged like museum pieces themselves. Someone was collecting them, or storing them for transport. "I think that warehouse was a way station. Cars came in, got new identities, then shipped out to private buyers overseas." Chen stood and walked to the grimy window, peering through the blinds. The operation would need someone with connections, someone who could make city records disappear, ensure certain properties stayed off development lists, someone like a city councilman. "Exactly." She turned back to Jake. "Which is why your refusal to demo that building upset their entire timeline. They needed that warehouse empty and demolished to destroy evidence." A chill ran down Jake's spine as another piece clicked into place. The original demolition order, it came through Caldwell's office. He specifically requested our company. They wanted you to unknowingly destroy the evidence. When you refused, you became a liability. Chen returned to the table, her expression grim. "Jake, I need you to think carefully. Has anyone been asking questions about your schedule, your routines? Anyone new in your life, even someone who seems friendly?" Jake's blood turned to ice as he thought about Sarah, the reporter who'd shown such keen interest in his story, who'd appeared so conveniently after everything started. There might be someone. Before Chen could respond, the lights in the parking lot went out with an audible pop. Through the thin walls, they heard car doors slamming shut. Multiple vehicles, engines still running. Chen drew her weapon in one fluid motion. "Stay low," she whispered, moving toward the door. "We've got company." The smell of cigarette smoke and stale coffee filled the cramped surveillance van as Jake watched the warehouse through night vision monitors. 3 days had passed since Marcus's near-death experience, and the crew had reluctantly agreed to take shifts monitoring the building while they figured out their next move. What they'd discovered was both reassuring and terrifying. "Movement on the north side," whispered Tony from the passenger seat, adjusting the zoom on the thermal camera. "Same pattern as yesterday, 2 figures keeping to the shadows." Jake leaned forward, studying the green-tinted screen. The warehouse had become a magnet for unwanted attention since word of their discovery had somehow leaked. Whether it was the insurance investigator, the mysterious woman who'd been asking questions around the neighborhood, or the black sedans that appeared at irregular intervals, someone was definitely watching them watch the cars. "They're not getting close enough to see inside," Jake observed. "Means they don't have keys, don't know the entry codes. They're fishing." "Or they're waiting for us to make the first move," Tony countered, his voice tight with exhaustion. None of them had slept properly since Marcus had been attacked. The hospital had released him with a concussion and strict orders to rest, but he'd insisted on taking the morning shift, despite Jake's protests. The radio crackled to life with Rachel's voice from her position at the diner across the street. "Jake, you need to see this. Police car just pulled up. Detective Reyes is heading your way." Jake's blood ran cold. Detective Reyes had been sniffing around the construction site ever since their insurance claims had been filed. A sharp woman with intelligent eyes and a reputation for solving cold cases, she was exactly the kind of law enforcement attention they couldn't afford right now. "Pack it up," Jake ordered, but Tony was already shutting down the equipment. They'd prepared for this possibility, creating a plausible cover story about investigating the vandalism that had damaged their equipment. The surveillance gear disappeared into hidden compartments as Jake climbed into the driver's seat. The detective intercepted them 2 blocks away, her unmarked sedan blocking their path with practiced precision. Through the windshield, Jake could see her making a phone call, probably running their plates. His palms grew slick with sweat as she approached the van. "Mr. Sullivan," Detective Reyes said, her tone professionally neutral but her eyes missing nothing. "Interesting coincidence, finding you here so late. Having more equipment problems?" "Can't be too careful these days," Jake replied, forcing his voice to remain steady. Whoever hit our site might come back. Insurance company suggested we keep an eye on things. Right. She glanced at Tony, who was doing his best impression of a bored night watchman. And your insurance company recommended surveillance equipment? The question hung in the air like a trap. Jake realized she'd been watching them longer than they'd thought, had probably seen them setting up the cameras and thermal imaging gear, equipment that would cost more than his crew made in 6 months. Private security consultant, Tony interjected smoothly. Friend of mine from the army, owed me a favor after I helped him move last month. Detective Reyes studied Tony's face, clearly weighing the truth of his statement. I wasn't aware there had been any additional incidents reported at your worksite. Nothing worth bothering you folks about, Jake said. Just some kids maybe, messing around, found some beer bottles, cigarette butts. You know how it is. Actually, I don't. Her smile was sharp as broken glass. See, I've been working this area for 8 years, Mr. Sullivan. I know every building, every business, every regular troublemaker. And that warehouse you've been watching? It's been quiet as a tomb for the better part of a decade. No kids, no vandals, no problems, until you showed up. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Jake felt the careful walls of their deception crumbling under her penetrating stare. She knew, maybe not everything, but enough to be dangerous. Maybe we spooked whoever was causing problems. He tried, but even to his own ears the explanation sounded weak. Maybe. Detective Reyes stepped back from the van but didn't move away from their path. Word of advice, Mr. Sullivan. This neighborhood has a long memory and a short temper. People who go looking for trouble in the wrong places tend to find more than they bargained for, much more. The warning sent ice through Jake's veins. Was she threatening them or trying to protect them? Before he could ask, she was walking back to her car, dismissing them with a casual wave. As they drove away, Tony finally exhaled the breath he'd been holding. She knows something. Question is, Jake muttered, checking his mirrors for the 3rd time, whose side is she on? Behind them, Detective Reyes sat in her car, speaking rapidly into her phone. Whatever she was reporting, Jake had the sinking feeling their problems had just multiplied exponentially. Jake's hands trembled as he scrolled through the encrypted files on Marcus' laptop, the warehouse office lit only by the pale glow of the screen. Each document revealed another layer of the conspiracy. Shipping manifests, offshore account numbers, coded communications between Marcus and someone identified only as the broker. The stolen supercars were just the tip of the iceberg. Jesus Christ, he muttered, clicking on a folder marked Pipeline Operations. Inside were blueprints of warehouses across 3 states, each marked with acquisition dates and demolition schedules. Sullivan Construction had been unknowingly destroying evidence for years. The sound of gravel crunching outside made him freeze. Headlights swept across the window as a black sedan pulled up to the warehouse entrance. Jake slammed the laptop shut and ducked behind Marcus's desk, his heart hammering against his ribs. Car doors slammed. Footsteps approached the office, deliberate and unhurried. Jake recognized the voice immediately. Detective Morrison, but he wasn't alone. You sure Sullivan's here? Morrison asked. His truck's parked out back, replied a voice Jake didn't recognize, gravelly and cold. He's been sniffing around all week. Time to clean up this mess. Jake's blood turned to ice. Morrison wasn't investigating the case. He was part of it. The detective's questions, his convenient arrival at the scene, his insistence on keeping the discovery quiet until morning. It all made sense now. What about the cars? The stranger continued. Already in motion. The transport trucks will be here in 30 minutes. We move everything to the backup facility in Newark. By tomorrow, this place will be nothing but rubble and ashes. Jake eased the office door open a crack. Through the gap, he could see Morrison standing near the Ferrari, his badge gleaming in the harsh fluorescent light. The other man was tall and lean, wearing an expensive suit that looked out of place in the dusty warehouse. Torino's not going to be happy about losing this location, Suit said. Torino's got bigger problems. The FBI's breathing down his neck on those port operations. This warehouse was compromised the moment Sullivan's crew broke in. Jake's mind raced. Torino, Vincent Torino, the crime boss who'd supposedly died in a prison transport accident 3 years ago. But if he was alive and running this operation, it explained the scale of what they'd uncovered. Morrison's radio crackled. "Detective, we've got movement at the Sullivan residence. Subject appears to be packing." Jake's stomach dropped. They were watching his house, probably had been since Tuesday. If Sarah came home early from her sister's place— "Keep eyes on the house," Morrison responded. "Don't move until I give the word." Jake had to warn her, had to get out of here. But as he shifted his weight, his elbow knocked against a coffee mug on Marcus's desk. The ceramic hit the floor with a sharp crack that echoed through the office. The conversation outside stopped. "Check the office," Morrison said quietly. Jake grabbed the laptop and slipped out the back of the office, using the shadows between the cars for cover. The warehouse's rear exit was 50 yards away, but he'd have to cross an open area to reach it. Behind him, he heard the office door bang open. He's not here, but the desk's still warm. And look at this. The laptop. Jake realized he'd grabbed a decoy. Marcus's real computer was still on the desk. "Son of a bitch has been reading everything," Morrison snarled. "Put out an APB. Jake Sullivan, wanted for questioning in connection with multiple felonies. Armed and dangerous. Armed and dangerous." That gave them carte blanche to shoot first and ask questions later. Jake crept between a Lamborghini and a Porsche, the exotic cars providing cover, as he worked his way toward the exit. His phone buzzed with a text message, the sound impossibly loud in the silence. Both men spun toward the noise. "There!" Suit shouted, pulling a pistol from his jacket. Jake ran, abandoning stealth for speed. Gunshots boomed behind him, bullets sparking off concrete and metal. He reached the exit and slammed into the crash bar, bursting into the cool night air. His pickup truck sat in the employee parking area, keys still in the ignition. More shots rang out as he sprinted across the asphalt, Morrison's voice shouting into his radio, calling for backup, setting up roadblocks. Jake dove into the truck and gunned the engine. As he peeled out of the lot, his phone rang. Sarah's number. "Jake? Thank God. There are police cars surrounding our house. What's happening?" "Listen to me carefully," he said, taking a hard right onto the service road. "Do not go home. Morrison's dirty. He's working with them. Meet me at the place we had our first date. You remember? The overlook by Miller's Pond. But Jake, trust me. I'll explain everything when I see you. And Sarah, make sure you're not followed." The phone went dead as police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. The abandoned steel mill loomed against the storm clouds like a skeletal cathedral, its rusted girders reaching toward the darkening sky. Jake gripped the steering wheel tighter as he navigated the cracked asphalt road leading to the rendezvous point Marcus had specified. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, but Sarah's life hung in the balance. His phone buzzed with a text, "Alone, 3rd floor, East Wing. No cops or she dies." Jake parked beside a collapsed loading dock and stepped out into the humid evening air. The wind carried the metallic tang of rust and decay. He'd been in enough dangerous buildings to read the signs: loose concrete, sagging beams, floors that could give way without warning. Marcus had chosen well. This place was a death trap even without hostile intent. The main entrance hung open, its doors long since stolen for scrap. Jake's footsteps echoed in the cavernous space as he made his way toward a concrete stairwell. Graffiti covered the walls, and broken glass crunched beneath his boots. Somewhere in the darkness above, water dripped steadily from a leaking roof. His phone rang as he reached the 2nd-floor landing. "Detective Rodriguez." "Jake, where the hell are you? We tracked Marcus's phone to—" Jake hung up and powered off the device. Marcus would be watching, waiting for any sign of police involvement. Sarah's safety depended on Jake following the rules, at least until he could assess the situation. The 3rd floor stretched before him like an industrial wasteland. Moonlight filtered through broken windows, casting long shadows between the massive support columns. Jake moved carefully, testing each step. The concrete felt solid, but rust stains suggested water damage that could have compromised the structure. "Over here, Sullivan." Marcus's voice echoed from the far end of the floor. Jake squinted into the shadows and made out two figures near the eastern wall. One stood upright, Marcus. The other sat slumped in what looked like an old office chair. "Sarah?" Jake called out. "She's breathing," Marcus replied. "For now. Keep walking." Slowly. As Jake approached, details became clearer. Sarah's hands were zip-tied behind the chair, and duct tape covered her mouth. Her eyes were alert but frightened. A thin line of dried blood ran from her temple where someone had struck her. Marcus stepped into a patch of moonlight, and Jake saw the pistol in his right hand. His left arm hung awkwardly, probably still healing from their previous encounter. "Good, that might provide an advantage. You've caused me considerable trouble, Sullivan. That warehouse was supposed to stay buried forever." "The cars belonged to victims," Jake said, keeping his voice steady. "Families who lost everything while you and Donnelly got rich." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think this is about money? Those cars were evidence. Evidence that would have brought down a lot more than just Donnelly and me. What are you talking about? The insurance scam was small time. A few million here and there. But some of those vehicles, they were used in other operations. Drug runs, arms deals, human trafficking." Marcus's eyes glittered in the darkness. "There are very powerful people who needed those cars to disappear permanently." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "You're saying—" "I'm saying you didn't just stumble onto a simple fraud case. You uncovered a logistics network that spans 3 states and involves people who kill without hesitation." Marcus gestured with the gun. "People like me. Then why keep Sarah alive? Why not just disappear?" "Because I need insurance too. The warehouse burned, but there were records, documentation, hidden where only I can find it." Marcus smiled coldly. "I'm going to make you an offer, Sullivan. Walk away. Forget everything you've seen. Take your crew and leave town. Do that, and she lives." Jake glanced at Sarah, who shook her head frantically despite the tape. She knew, as he did, that Marcus couldn't afford to leave witnesses. "And if I refuse? Then you both die tonight, and I disappear with enough evidence to keep my former associates busy hunting ghosts instead of hunting me." A sound from the stairwell made them both freeze. Footsteps, careful but audible. Marcus swung the gun toward the noise. "You called the cops," he hissed. "I didn't." The lights went out. Emergency power had been cut years ago, leaving them in near total darkness. Jake heard Sarah's chair scrape against concrete and dove toward the sound. A muzzle flash lit the space like lightning, followed by the deafening crack of gunshot. Jake hit the floor hard, rolling behind a support column as concrete dust rained down from where the bullet had struck. His ears rang, but he could hear Marcus moving, searching. "Wrong choice, Sullivan," Marcus called out. "Now you both die." Another muzzle flash revealed Marcus advancing toward Sarah's position. Jake grabbed a chunk of broken concrete and hurled it toward the far wall. As Marcus spun toward the noise, Jake launched himself from cover. The tackle caught Marcus low, sending them both crashing into a stack of old machinery. The abandoned textile factory on Riverside Drive looked like every other derelict building in the industrial district, but Jake knew better now. Marcus Chen had chosen his hiding spots carefully, and this one had been mentioned twice in the encrypted files they'd recovered from the warehouse office. As Jake crouched behind a rusted shipping container, watching the building's dark windows, he wondered how many more secrets were buried in plain sight throughout the city. Detective Sarah Martinez adjusted her position beside him, her breath visible in the cold morning air. "SWAT's in position on the north side. We've got the rear exit covered, but if Chen's as paranoid as you say, there might be tunnels we don't know about." "He's got escape routes," Jake confirmed, remembering the hidden passages they'd found in the warehouse. "Guy doesn't take chances. Question is whether he's desperate enough to use them. The radio crackled softly in Martinez's earpiece. She listened intently, then turned to Jake. Thermal imaging shows at least 3 heat signatures inside, ground floor, near what used to be the main production area. Jake studied the building's facade, noting the reinforced doors and the subtle modifications that most people would miss. New locks on old doors, fresh concrete patches in seemingly random locations, security cameras disguised as broken fixtures. Marcus had turned another abandoned building into a fortress, and Jake was betting this one held more than just cars. The financial records we found suggest this is where he laundered the money, Martinez whispered. Fake restoration projects, ghost employees, the works. If we can prove the connection between the theft ring and the money laundering operation. She was cut off by the sound of an engine starting somewhere inside the building. Not the refined purr of a supercar, but the industrial rumble of something heavy. Something designed for breaking through obstacles. All units, be advised, suspect may be mobile. Martinez spoke urgently into her radio. Unknown vehicle type, but it sounds big. The building's main door exploded outward in a shower of metal and concrete as a modified armored truck burst through. The vehicle had been reinforced with steel plating and a reinforced bumper that could punch through a brick wall. Behind the wheel, Jake caught a glimpse of Marcus Chen's determined face before the truck veered toward the riverside exit. "He's heading for the docks," Jake shouted, already running toward Martinez's unmarked sedan. "There's a private boat launch down there. If he reaches the water—" Martinez was already moving, barking orders into her radio as they sprinted across the broken asphalt. The armored truck had a head start, but it was heavy and cumbersome on the narrow industrial roads. Their sedan was faster, more maneuverable, and Martinez drove like she'd been born behind the wheel. They raced through the maze of abandoned buildings and rusted machinery that lined the waterfront. The truck ahead of them smashed through a chain-link gate without slowing down, sending sparks flying as the metal scraped against its armored sides. Jake could see the boat launch now, a concrete ramp leading down to the murky river water. A cigarette boat was moored at the small dock, its engines already running. "He's got an escape boat," Jake called out over the roar of their engine. "Fast one, too. If he reaches that—" Martinez floored the accelerator, pushing the sedan to its limits. They were gaining on the truck, but the boat launch was less than 200 yards away. Jake could see Chen's plan now. The armored truck would get him to the water. The boat would carry him downstream to any number of hiding spots along the industrial waterfront. From there, he could disappear completely. The truck hit the boat ramp at full speed, but the steep angle and wet concrete proved too much for the top-heavy vehicle. It skidded sideways, tires screaming against the slick surface before tilting dangerously toward the water. For a moment it balanced on the edge of the dock, half on land and half over the dark river. Martinez brought their sedan to a controlled stop as SWAT vehicles converged from multiple directions. The armored truck's engine revved desperately, but the vehicle was stuck, its rear wheels spinning uselessly in the air. Through the reinforced windshield, Jake could see Marcus Chen's face, no longer determined but resigned to his fate. "Marcus Chen, this is Detective Martinez, Metro PD," she called out through a megaphone. "The building is surrounded, your vehicle is disabled, and there's nowhere to run. Step out with your hands visible." The truck's engine died. For a long moment, nothing moved except the gentle lapping of river water against the concrete dock. Then the driver's door opened slowly, and Marcus Chen emerged, hands raised, looking older and more tired than Jake remembered. The man who had orchestrated a $50 million theft ring, who had killed to protect his secrets, now looked like what he really was, a cornered criminal with no options left. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Jake felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. It was finally over. The warehouse felt different in the pre-dawn darkness. Jake crouched behind a stack of rusted oil drums 50 yards from the main entrance, watching the shadows for any sign of movement. The weight of the Glock Detective Martinez had given him pressed against his ribs, a constant reminder that this had escalated far beyond construction disputes and insurance fraud. Marcus emerged from behind the building, moving with surprising stealth for his bulk. He held up 3 fingers, then pointed toward the rear loading dock. 3 guards. Jake nodded and checked his watch. 4:47 a.m. In 13 minutes, Martinez and her backup would move in from the north side. The plan was simple in theory: create enough of a distraction to draw Castellanos and his remaining crew out into the open where the police could take them cleanly. In practice, Jake knew it would probably go sideways the moment they made their first move. A car engine rumbled in the distance. Jake pressed himself lower as headlights swept across the warehouse exterior. A black Mercedes pulled up to the main entrance, and Vincent Castellanos stepped out, followed by 2 men Jake didn't recognize. Even from this distance, he could see the tension in Castellanos' movements. The man was clearly rattled. "Where the hell is Torino?" Castellanos' voice carried clearly in the still air. "Haven't heard from him since yesterday," one of the guards replied. "His phone goes straight to voicemail." Jake suppressed a grim smile. Torino was currently enjoying the hospitality of the county lockup, along with the 2 men they'd captured at the construction site. Martinez had worked some magic to keep their arrests quiet, letting Castellanos wonder what had happened to his muscle. Castellanos disappeared inside the warehouse, barking orders. Jake counted at least 6 voices now. Too many for comfort, but they were committed to this course of action. He pulled out his phone and sent Marcus the prearranged signal, a simple thumbs-up emoji. The first explosion came from the building's electrical panel. Marcus had rigged a small charge to the main breaker box, nothing dangerous but loud enough to get everyone's attention. Shouts erupted from inside the warehouse as emergency lighting kicked in, casting eerie red shadows through the windows. Jake sprinted toward the main entrance, keeping low. The plan called for him to get inside and locate the financial records Martinez needed to build her case. Danny had spotted a small office space on the building's 2nd level during their initial reconnaissance, probably where Castellanos kept his documentation. The warehouse doors burst open as guards rushed out to investigate the explosion. Jake pressed himself against the building's wall, counting bodies as they passed. 4 men headed toward the rear of the building where Marcus was waiting. That left at least 2 inside with Castellanos. He slipped through the open doorway and immediately ducked behind the nearest car, a pristine Ferrari Testarossa that probably cost more than his annual salary. The warehouse's emergency lighting painted everything in hellish red, making the collection of stolen supercars look like expensive tombstones. Voices echoed from the far end of the building. Jake could make out Castellanos talking rapidly on his phone, something about moving the operation immediately. They were spooked, which was exactly what Martinez had hoped for. Desperate people made mistakes. Jake worked his way between the cars, heading for the metal staircase that led to the office level. Each step felt exposed despite the shadows. His heart hammered as he climbed, the old metal groaning softly under his weight. The office door was unlocked. Inside, he found exactly what they'd hoped for: filing cabinets full of documentation, a computer still logged into what looked like accounting software, and a wall covered with photographs and shipping schedules. Jake pulled out his phone and started photographing everything, working as quickly as possible. A second explosion rocked the building, Marcus's backup charge. More shouting erupted from below, followed by the distinctive crack of gunfire. Jake's blood went cold. That wasn't part of the plan. He pocketed his phone and drew the Glock, moving to the office window that overlooked the warehouse floor. Below, he could see Castellanos and 1 guard taking cover behind a Lamborghini, firing toward the rear entrance. Return fire sparked off the concrete near their position, police arriving earlier than scheduled. Then Jake saw him. Marcus pinned down behind an overturned workbench near the loading dock, blood visible on his left arm. 2 of Castellanos' men had flanked around and were closing in on his position. The smart play was to stay hidden, wait for the police to handle it. But Marcus was there because of him, because Jake had dragged him into this mess. He'd already lost too much to Vincent Castellanos. Jake moved toward the staircase, weapon ready. The emergency lighting flickered, casting dancing shadows across the warehouse floor. In the distance, Sirens wailed as more police units responded to the gunfire. But Marcus might not have that long. Time to finish what they'd started. The abandoned steel mill loomed against the storm-darkened sky like a monument to decay. Jake crouched behind a rusted shipping container, rain streaming down his face as he watched 3 black SUVs circle the perimeter. Marcus had chosen his battleground well, a maze of corrugated metal buildings and industrial debris where echoes would confuse and muzzle flashes would be swallowed by shadows. Detective Sarah Chen's voice crackled through his earpiece. "SWAT's 10 minutes out. Do not engage until—" "He's got Meredith," Jake whispered, cutting her off. 10 minutes might as well be 10 hours. Through the grimy windows of the main building, he caught glimpses of movement. Marcus had turned this place into a fortress, complete with armed guards positioned at every entrance. But Jake knew industrial sites better than anyone. Every building had weak points, service tunnels, forgotten access ways that blueprints never showed. He belly-crawled through the mud toward the building's rear wall, where a steam pipe had long ago burst through the foundation. The gap was barely wide enough for his shoulders, but it would have to do. As he squeezed through the opening, the stench of motor oil and rust filled his nostrils. Inside, the mill stretched out like a cathedral of abandonment. Overhead cranes hung motionless from tracks that disappeared into the gloom. Jake moved between massive support pillars, each footstep carefully placed to avoid the scattered debris. Somewhere in this industrial graveyard, Marcus held the only person who could definitively prove the conspiracy that had killed Tommy. A voice echoed from the far end of the building. "Marcus, calm and controlled as always. The problem with your brother, Meredith, was that he lacked vision. He saw stolen cars where I saw opportunity. He saw crime where I saw business evolution." Jake crept closer, using the machinery as cover. Through a gap between 2 old furnaces, he spotted them. Meredith sat tied to a chair in a small office area, her face defiant, despite the blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. Marcus paced before her, his expensive suit incongruous in the decrepit surroundings. "Tommy understood," Meredith spat. "That's why you had to kill him." "I didn't kill anyone," Marcus replied smoothly. "Mr. Kozlov's associates handled that unfortunate necessity. I simply facilitated introductions." Jake's blood turned to ice. Kozlov, the Russian crime boss whose tentacles reached into every dirty corner of the city. This wasn't just about stolen cars anymore. Marcus had been playing middleman between high-end thieves and international criminals, using his legitimate businesses to launder both money and vehicles. "The warehouse was perfect," Marcus continued, apparently enjoying his captive audience. "Hidden in plain sight, scheduled for demolition. Who would think to look for a $50 million operation in a building marked for destruction? Your brother's crew handed us the ideal cover story." Meredith struggled against her bonds. Jake figured it out. He knows everything. Mr. Sullivan has been remarkably persistent, I'll grant you that. But persistence without proper backup tends to be terminal. 2 guards flanked the office entrance, assault rifles held casually but ready. Jake counted at least 4 more stationed throughout the building. Even if he could reach Meredith, getting her out alive would require a miracle. His phone vibrated. A text from Chen, Kozlov's crew approaching from the east. "Get out now." Jake's jaw tightened. Kozlov himself was coming to clean up loose ends. Whatever Marcus had promised the Russian, it wasn't enough to protect him from his own associates. Honor among thieves was just another fairy tale. The sound of approaching vehicles rumbled through the storm. Marcus checked his watch, his composure finally showing cracks. "It seems our Russian friends have decided to expedite their timeline." "They're going to kill you too," Meredith said. "You know that, right?" "Perhaps, but I've prepared for that contingency." Marcus pulled out a detonator, its red light blinking ominously in the dim space. "Kozlov thinks he's coming to eliminate witnesses. He doesn't know about the little farewell gift I've planted throughout this building." Jake's demolition experience kicked in automatically. The strategic placement of charges, the way Marcus had chosen this particular building, it wasn't just a meeting place, it was a tomb designed to bury everyone inside, along with any evidence of the conspiracy. The front doors exploded inward as Kozlov's men breached the entrance. Gunfire erupted immediately as Marcus's guards opened up from their concealed positions. In the chaos of muzzle flashes and shouting voices, Jake saw his chance. He sprinted toward the office, diving behind an overturned workbench as bullets sparked off metal around him. Meredith's eyes went wide as she spotted him, and she shook her head frantically, mouthing bomb and pointing toward Marcus. But Marcus had vanished, leaving only the detonator sitting on a desk like a coiled snake. Through the smoke and gunfire, Jake could hear sirens in the distance, Chen's backup finally arriving. The question was whether anyone would survive long enough to see them. He reached for his radio, knowing that somewhere in this industrial maze, Marcus was preparing to bring down the entire building on their heads. The warehouse felt like a tomb as Jake crept through the shadows between the million-dollar machines, his heart hammering against his ribs. Every creak of the old building made him freeze, listening for footsteps that might belong to Marcus Chen's men. The stolen supercars gleamed like sleeping predators in the dim light filtering through grimy windows, their chrome and carbon fiber surfaces catching fragments of the late afternoon sun. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Rivera, backup delayed. Traffic accident blocking main route. Stay hidden until we arrive. Perfect. Just perfect. A door slammed somewhere in the building, the sound echoing through the cavernous space. Jake ducked behind a midnight blue Lamborghini, pressing himself against its cool metal flank. Voices drifted from the front of the warehouse. At least 3 men, maybe more. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent, angry. "Check every corner," someone shouted. "Sullivan's here somewhere, and he's not leaving alive." Jake's mouth went dry. He recognized that voice. Tommy Ricci, Marcus Chen's enforcer, the same man who'd put 2 bullets in Detective Morrison just hours earlier. The same man who'd been hunting Jake since this nightmare began. Moving carefully, Jake worked his way deeper into the collection, using the cars as cover. His construction boots felt impossibly loud on the concrete floor, each step a potential death sentence. Behind him, he could hear the methodical search beginning, car doors opening and slamming shut, footsteps moving in a grid pattern. Near the back wall, Jake spotted something that made his pulse quicken. A red Ferrari 458, its driver's side door slightly ajar. The same car that had started this whole mess when his demolition crew first broke into the warehouse 3 days ago. The car that contained the evidence Detective Rivera needed to bring down Marcus Chen's entire operation. Jake slipped toward the Ferrari, keeping low. Inside the glove compartment, wrapped in plastic, were the shipping manifests and financial records that proved Chen had been using his legitimate import business as a front for an international car theft ring. Without that evidence, Chen would walk free, and Jake would spend the rest of his very short life looking over his shoulder. "Over here," a voice called out. "I found something." Jake's blood turned to ice. Through the gap between 2 cars, he saw Tommy Ricci holding up Jake's hard hat, the one he'd dropped while climbing through a broken window 20 minutes earlier. "He's definitely in here," Ricci continued. "Spread out. Check under every car, behind every wheel. The boss wants this finished before the cops show up." 3 men fanned out across the warehouse floor, their weapons drawn. Jake recognized 2 of them from the construction site. Chen's men who'd been posing as potential buyers interested in the property. The third was a stranger, a tall man with a spider tattoo creeping up his neck. Jake reached the Ferrari and carefully opened the glove compartment. His fingers closed around the plastic-wrapped documents just as footsteps approached from his left. Through the car's windows, he could see Spider Tattoo methodically checking each vehicle, getting closer with every second. A distant siren wailed, still blocks away but growing louder. Rivera's backup, finally. "Shit," Ricci snarled. "Move faster. We need to find Sullivan and torch this place before those cops get here." Torch the place. Jake's stomach lurched as he realized Chen's true plan. burn down the warehouse with Jake inside, destroy all the evidence, and claim the fire was an accident during demolition prep. Clean, simple, and completely believable. Spider Tattoo was only 2 cars away now. Jake clutched the documents and tried to think. The main entrance was blocked, the loading dock was too far. But there was a fire escape on the east wall, hidden behind a stack of car covers. If he could reach it without being seen. The man was 1 car away. Jake could hear his breathing, could smell his cigarette-stained clothing. In 30 seconds, maybe less, Spider Tattoo would round the Ferrari's rear bumper and find him crouched there like a cornered animal. Jake made his choice. He erupted from his hiding spot, sprinting toward the east wall with everything he had. Shouts exploded behind him, followed by the sharp crack of gunfire. A bullet whined off the concrete inches from his head. Another shattered the rear window of a Porsche to his right. There, by the wall. More shots rang out as Jake dove behind a covered vehicle near the fire escape. He could see the metal ladder through a gap in the stacked covers, maybe 15 feet away. The sirens were getting closer, but not close enough. He had the evidence Chen needed to hide, but first he had to survive long enough to hand it over. Footsteps pounded across the concrete, converging on his position from 3 directions. Jake took a deep breath, said a quick prayer, and prepared to run for his life. The warehouse groaned under the weight of approaching sirens as Jake pressed his back against the cold concrete wall, watching Marcus circle him like a predator savoring its final strike. Blood trickled from the gash on Jake's forehead, but his grip on the crowbar remained steady. "You could have walked away rich," Marcus said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space between the rows of gleaming supercars. "Instead, you chose to be a hero." Jake's eyes darted to the main entrance where red and blue lights painted the grimy windows. Detective Chen had gotten his message. "The police are already here, Marcus. It's over." Not quite. Marcus raised his pistol, the barrel catching the strobing light. "They'll find 2 bodies and a story about how you killed me before taking your own life. Guilt over discovering your father's dirty secret finally broke you." The words hit Jake harder than any physical blow. "My father wasn't part of this." Tommy Sullivan was the best foreman Castellano Construction ever had. He also knew when to keep his mouth shut about certain projects. Marcus's smile was cruel. "Who do you think helped us modify this place 15 years ago? Those hidden rooms, the reinforced walls, the drainage system that could wash away evidence. All Tommy's handiwork." Jake's world tilted. The man he'd idolized, the reason he'd followed in his footsteps, had been complicit in this operation from the beginning. "You're lying. Check the blueprint sometime. Your father's signature is on every modification." Marcus took a step closer. "The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, Jake. You could have inherited more than just his job." The sound of splintering wood echoed through the warehouse as the police breached the main entrance. Voices shouted commands, boots pounded against concrete, but Marcus didn't flinch. His attention remained locked on Jake. "Last chance," Marcus whispered. "Tell them you found me here, already dead. Take the money and disappear. Honor your father's real legacy." Jake thought of Maria, of the life they'd planned together, of the house they'd never afford on his foreman's salary. He thought of the crew members who trusted him, who'd followed his instincts even when they thought he was crazy. Then he thought of his father's calloused hands teaching him to read blueprints, explaining that a man's work was his signature on the world. "My father built things that lasted," Jake said quietly. "This isn't lasting. This is just hiding." Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger. "Then you'll die with your principles intact." Jake dove sideways as the gunshot cracked through the air, the bullet sparking off the concrete where his head had been. He rolled behind a pristine Lamborghini, its yellow paint reflecting the chaos of police lights through the windows. "NYPD, drop your weapon!" Detective Chen's voice boomed from the entrance. More gunshots erupted as Marcus fired wildly toward the police, using the cars as cover while advancing on Jake's position. Jake crawled beneath a Ferrari, the acrid smell of gunpowder mixing with motor oil and dust. A tactical unit swarmed through the warehouse, their coordinated movements sharp and professional. Marcus was outnumbered, outgunned, but desperation made him dangerous. He grabbed a jerry can of gasoline from a workbench, splashing fuel across the nearest cars. "You want evidence?" Marcus screamed. "Come and get it!" He pulled out a lighter, but Jake was already moving. 15 years of construction work had given him strength and speed. He tackled Marcus from behind, both men crashing into the workbench, tools scattered across the floor as they fought for control of the lighter. Marcus was smaller but vicious, clawing at Jake's eyes while trying to twist free. Jake wrapped his arm around Marcus's throat, squeezing until the man's struggles weakened. The lighter fell from Marcus's fingers, clattering harmlessly across the concrete. "It's over," Jake gasped, maintaining his hold as police surrounded them. Detective Chen approached cautiously, her weapon trained on Marcus. "Let him go, Jake. We've got him." Jake released his grip and stepped back, watching as the officers cuffed Marcus Castellano. The man who'd orchestrated millions in theft, who'd killed to protect his secret, looked suddenly small and ordinary in the harsh fluorescent lights. "Your father would be proud," Chen said quietly as the paramedics checked Jake's injuries. This took real courage. Jake watched the stolen cars being photographed and catalogued, each one representing someone's loss, someone's violation. The warehouse that had seemed so threatening now felt hollow, its secrets finally exposed to daylight. Outside, Maria waited by the ambulance, her eyes bright with relief and pride. Behind her, Jake's crew stood together, still processing what they'd uncovered. Tony caught his eye and nodded, a gesture of respect between working men who'd seen something through to the end. As they led Marcus away, the man looked back one final time. "You could have had everything." Jake took Maria's hand and felt the solid weight of his father's watch on his wrist. "I already do,"